Chijioke was a 32-year-old man who lived in a small village in southeastern Nigeria. He was a hardworking farmer, known for his low haircut, traditional attire, and African-styled hairband, which gave him a unique look among his peers. Despite his best efforts, Chijioke's life was far from prosperous. He toiled endlessly in his fields, growing yams and cassava, yet the harvests were often poor. His house was small, made of mud, and his family lived a life of quiet struggle. His elderly parents depended on him, and the burden of caring for them weighed heavily on his shoulders. Chijioke's dreams of a better life seemed distant, but he never gave up hope, believing that one day things would change. The village where Chijioke lived was picturesque, surrounded by lush forests and rolling hills. Life in the village was simple, and the community was close-knit. People relied on agriculture for survival, and everyone worked together to sustain their livelihoods. However, despite the beauty of the land, poverty was widespread. Chijioke's friends, Chinami, Ifeni, and Obina, often met in the village square, complaining about their lack of wealth and opportunities. Chijioke, although content with his humble life, sometimes wondered if there was more to the world than what his village could offer. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of work, Chijioke sat with his friends and their conversation turned to the topic of wealth. As the conversation continued, Shima, Ifini, and Obina spoke about a secret that had been passed down through generations in the village. It was the story of a powerful ritual, one that promised wealth beyond imagination. They told Chijioke that they had visited an old ritualist who could grant them all the riches they desired, but the price was steep. Each person had to make a sacrifice to the gods. The ritual would bring wealth, but it would also demand something in return. Chijioke's friends eagerly explained that this ritual would make them rich enough to escape the cycle of poverty, but the price was a commitment to perform a yearly ritual during Christmas, distributing food to the people as a sacrifice to the gods. Chijioke listened, torn between the temptation of wealth and his deep-rooted beliefs in his faith. Over the following weeks, Chijioke's friends persisted, convincing him that the ritual was the only way to change their fate. They told him that the old ritualist had helped them before, and they were now living in comfort and luxury. Chijioke, struggling with his financial woes, began to wonder if the ritual might be his chance to escape his poverty. His friends promised that after the ritual, life would become easier. They explained that the gods would bless him with wealth, but in exchange, he would have to share food with the villagers every Christmas. This sounded like a small price to pay for a lifetime of riches. Yet, Chijioke couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong, but the lure of wealth grew stronger with each passing day. After much internal struggle, Chijioke finally agreed to go along with his friend's plan. The thought of providing a better life for his aging parents, of never worrying about his next meal, and of achieving the success he had always dreamed of, clouded his judgment. Chima, Ifenyi, and Obinya were thrilled with his decision, and they arranged for the ritual to take place in secret. Chijioke tried to push away the unease he felt, telling himself that it would all work out for the better. On the appointed night, they met the ritualist at the edge of the village. He was an old man, shrouded in mystery, with eyes that seemed to know the depths of their souls. The ritual was simple but powerful. They had to make their pledges to the gods and follow the instructions given by the ritualist. Under the cover of darkness, the ritual began. The air was thick with incense, and strange chants echoed through the forest. Chijioke felt both exhilarated and fearful. The ritualist performed several rites, drawing symbols on the ground with chalk and offering sacrifices to unseen gods. Each of the men was instructed to kneel and pledge their allegiance to the spirits, promising to follow the command of the gods. Sharing food with the people every Christmas as a form of sacrifice. The ritualist handed each of them a talisman, a small token that would protect them and guarantee the wealth they sought. The moment the ritual concluded, Chijioke felt a rush of energy, a strange sensation of power coursing through his body. He looked around at his friends, and they shared a knowing smile. The deal was done. Chijioke woke the next morning feeling different, alive in a way he had never felt before. As the days passed, the change became more apparent. His farm began to flourish in ways he could not explain. Crops that had previously withered now grew tall and strong. Soon after, he began to receive strange offers from traders who wanted to buy his produce at prices far higher than normal. People in the village started noticing the dramatic changes in his life. Chijioke's once humble home was renovated, and he bought new clothes, a car, and other luxuries. Within a short time, he became one of the wealthiest men in the village. His success was undeniable, and people were amazed at his sudden prosperity. However, with each passing day, Chijioke felt a growing unease deep inside. The sense of fulfillment that he had expected from his newfound wealth was missing. As promised by the ritualist, every Christmas, Chijioke was to share food with the entire village as part of the sacrifice to the gods. The first year, Chijioke reluctantly agreed, believing it was simply a part of the deal. He hosted a grand feast, inviting every villager to partake in the bounty. The food was abundant: rice, yam, chicken, vegetables, and fruits, all laid out in a way that was unimaginable for the poor villagers. People were overwhelmed with joy, and they praised Chijioke for his generosity. But in the midst of the celebration, Chijioke could not ignore the emptiness he felt. As he distributed the food, he wondered if the gods were truly pleased, or if there was something more sinister behind the ritual he had agreed to. As the years went by, Chijioke continued to fulfill the yearly command to distribute food during Christmas. Each year, the feast grew larger, the food more abundant, and the praise from the villagers louder. Yet, the weight of the ritual began to press more heavily on him. He had acquired wealth beyond his dreams, but it felt hollow. His once peaceful nights were now filled with strange dreams, visions of dark shadows and whispered voices that seemed to call to him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something he had summoned with the pact he made. One year, while preparing for the Christmas feast, Chijioke noticed something different. As he oversaw the massive preparations, women cooking, children running to and fro, and people coming from neighboring villages, he saw a figure walking towards the crowd. The man was dressed in simple robes, his face serious but calm. It was the prophet, a wandering preacher who had been known for his healing abilities and his devotion to God. He had heard of Chijioke's wealth and the ritual that came with it, and something about it disturbed him. He had seen many people fall to the temptation of riches, but he had never seen a man quite like Chijioke. The prophet, sensing a deep spiritual disturbance, approached Chijioke as he was preparing to distribute the food. He spoke quietly, warning him that the wealth he had gained came at a terrible cost, one that could not be paid by food or sacrifice alone. Chijioke, surprised and somewhat annoyed by the intrusions of his ancestors, he explained that the gods had given him wealth, and the food he shared with the villagers was a way to honor them. But the prophet would not be swayed. He implored Chijioke to stop, to end the ritual and seek forgiveness before it was too late. As Chijioke dismissed the prophet's pleas, the villagers began to gather around. They had no idea of the spiritual danger that lurked behind Chijioke's newfound fortune. To them, he was a hero, a man who had risen from poverty and was now providing them with food, something they had long lacked. When the prophet continued to speak out, urging them to stop accepting the food, the villagers grew angry. They had no understanding of the dark pact Chijioke had made and believed that the prophet was simply jealous of Chijioke's success. In their poverty, they could not see the deeper consequences. The situation quickly escalated. Some of the villagers, driven by hunger and desperation, began to shout at the prophet, calling him mad and accusing him of trying to spoil their good fortune. The prophet tried to remain calm, speaking of the consequences of following false gods and seeking wealth through dark rituals. But his words only seemed to fuel the anger of the crowd. A few villagers even went as far as to beat him, accusing him of trying to rob them of the food that had been promised. Chijioke, watching the scene unfold, felt a deep sense of shame. but it was too late to stop it now. That night, as Chioke lay in bed, the usual feeling of unease crept over him. But this time, it was stronger, more oppressive. The shadows in his room seemed to move, and he could hear faint whispers in the dark. The spirits he had summoned through the ritual were angry, and their presence was unmistakable. They had been pleased with his sacrifices in the past, but now they had turned against him. Chijioke could feel their cold, unforgiving eyes upon him. He had thought the ritual would grant him eternal wealth and peace, but it had only led him deeper into torment. The next morning, Chijioke went to the prophet, feeling the weight of the spirit's anger following him like a cloud. He had no choice but to seek help. When he found the prophet, he fell to his knees, asking for forgiveness and pleading for guidance. The prophet, though still bruised from the previous night's beating, took pity on Chijioke. He told him that the only way to rid himself of the spirits was to renounce the ritual and seek true redemption through prayer and devotion to God. The prophet led Chijioke through a series of prayers, asking God for mercy and deliverance. It was not an easy process, and Chijioke felt the oppressive weight of the spirits lifting slowly, as though they were reluctant to let go of their hold on him. For days, Chijioke stayed with the prophet, fasting and praying for forgiveness. He knew that he had made a terrible mistake, and he was determined to make amends, no matter the cost. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Chijioke began to feel a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. The spirits no longer haunted him, and the weight of guilt that had plagued him was lifted. He returned to his village, a changed man. No longer did he feel the need to distribute food in exchange for wealth. He understood now that true prosperity came not from the gods he had once worshipped, but from hard work, faith, and the love of his community. Chijioke made amends with the villagers, explaining the truth about the ritual and the consequences it had brought upon him. Many of them, though shocked and saddened, understood. They had seen the change in him, and they knew that he was now a man of integrity, no longer bound by the chains of the ritual. From that day forward, Chijioke lived a humble life, one filled with true peace and prosperity. And every Christmas, instead of performing the ritual sacrifice, he would gather the villagers together to share in a feast of gratitude, thankful for the blessings that came from the heavens, not from dark pacts. As Chijioke embraced his newfound understanding of true prosperity, the people of the village began to see the transformation within him. He no longer sought to impress others with his wealth or his food offerings. Instead, he focused on helping others in more meaningful ways. He spent his time teaching the younger generation the importance of hard work, faith, and humility. He used his resources to build schools and health centers, and he helped farmers improve their yields without relying on dark rituals or shortcuts. The village slowly began to flourish in ways that were sustainable and grounded in genuine faith and effort. Years passed, and Chijioke became a respected leader in the village. His wealth, though still substantial, was no longer the center of his life. The true richness of life, he had learned, lay in the relationships he built and the positive impact he had on those around him. People came to him for advice, and he was always ready to share his wisdom. His once troubled heart now overflowed with gratitude for the lessons he had learned and the grace he had received from God. During one of the Christmas seasons, as the year drew to a close, Chijioke gathered the villagers together for a different kind of celebration. This time, there was no grand feast, no sacrifice to the gods, but instead a ceremony of thanksgiving to God for the blessings they had all received. They lit candles and sang songs of praise, sharing stories of how they had all worked together to overcome challenges and build a stronger, more united community. It was in this simple celebration that Chijioke realized the true meaning of the command he had once misunderstood. The sacrifice he had made, the wealth he had sought, and the food he had shared had all been part of a greater journey, a journey that had taught him the importance of community, faith, and giving without expecting anything in return. It was a lesson he had learned the hard way, but it was a lesson that had shaped him into the man he had become. Chijioke's life became a living testimony to the power of redemption and the grace of God. He never forgot the struggles of his past, nor the pain he had caused others, but he used those experiences to fuel his desire to do good in the world. He was no longer a man driven by the need for wealth or fame. Instead, he was a man driven by a deep sense of purpose, to serve others, to lead with integrity, and to honor the God who had given him a second chance. As the years continued to pass, the village prospered in ways that were unimaginable. The children, now well educated and healthy, carried the legacy of Chijioke's teachings forward. They understood the value of hard work, faith, and helping others, and they continued to build on the foundation that had been laid before them. And so the story of Chijioke, the once wealthy man who had fallen prey to the temptation of dark rituals, became a cherished tale in the village, a story of redemption, transformation, and the true meaning of prosperity. It was a story that was passed down from generation to generation, reminding the people of the dangers of seeking shortcuts to success and the importance of living a life of integrity and faith. Every Christmas, the village would come together to celebrate, not to honor the gods of old, but to honor the God who had shown them the way to true wealth, a wealth not of material possessions, but of love, faith, and community. And in the heart of the village stood Chijioke, a humble man who had once been lost, but had found his way back to the light, guiding others along the same path. As the years continued to unfold, Chijioke's life became a living testament to the power of transformation. His journey from poverty to wealth, from spiritual confusion to true redemption, left a lasting legacy in his village and beyond. His story spread across neighboring communities, inspiring others who had once been tempted by the allure of quick wealth and the promises of dark rituals. People came from far and wide not only to hear about his wealth, but to learn about his redemption, the grace he had experienced, and the lessons he had learned. The prophet, who had once warned him, remained a close friend and spiritual guide. Over time, they became partners in faith, working together to spread a message of hope, repentance, and divine grace. They held prayer meetings, offering healing to those who had been affected by similar rituals. Chijioke's new calling was not in material success, but in the restoration of souls. Together with the prophet, he founded a spiritual center dedicated to bringing healing and spiritual awakening to the people who had been deceived by false promises. Every year, during the Christmas season, Chijioke would invite people from all walks of life to join in a special service. The once ritualistic feast had been transformed into a time of prayer, thanksgiving, and giving, where people would contribute not food, but their time, energy, and resources to help others in need. It was a celebration of God's grace and a reminder that true wealth came from giving and loving others selflessly, not from material accumulation or dark powers. On one particularly memorable Christmas, Chijioke stood before the gathered crowd, reflecting on the changes that had occurred over the years. The village had flourished, not because of his wealth, but because the community had come together in love and support. The children, whom he had once taught about hard work and humility, were now grown, and many had gone on to become successful farmers, doctors, teachers, and leaders in their own right. They carried with them the wisdom and values Chijioke had imparted to them. That day, as Chijioke addressed the village, he spoke with a depth of understanding that only someone who had walked through the darkness and into the light could possess. "We were all once lost," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "But through God's mercy, we have found our way. We are richer than we could have ever imagined, not because of the material wealth we possess, but because of the love we share with each other. That is the true prosperity." The villagers, moved by his words, stood together in silence, reflecting on the journey they had all taken. The prophet, standing at Chijioke's side, offered a prayer, asking for continued guidance and protection for the village. For Chijioke, and for all who had learned to live with integrity and faith. In the end, Chijioke's story became not just a part of the village's history, but a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt lost or forsaken. His life, full of struggle and redemption, became a reminder that no matter how far one may fall, God's grace could always raise them back up. Through Chijioke, the village had learned that the most valuable wealth was not material. It was the love and faith they carried in their hearts and the way they shared it with the world.